The exact portfolio size. Where you can stop worrying about your retirement. The people who sleep well at night about retirement are not the ones with the most money. They're the ones who crossed a specific number. And almost nobody in the financial media will tell you what that number actually is, because it's different for every person. It's calculable in about 10 minutes, and once you know it, you stop buying the products designed to sell you anxiety. That's the contradiction at the center of this whole conversation. Retirement anxiety is not caused by being bad with money. It's caused by not knowing your number. And the industry that benefits from your anxiety has a structural incentive to keep the answer vague. Save as much as you can. You'll need $1 million. Most people aren't saving enough. All of that is technically true the way eat less and move more is technically true about weight, which is to say, useless without a specific target your body can actually work toward. There is a number, a real one. Not a generational average, not a rule of thumb borrowed from a 1990s actuarial table. Your number. The portfolio size at which the math begins working hard enough that the anxiety no longer makes rational sense. Reaching it doesn't mean you stop contributing. It means you've crossed a threshold where the portfolio itself has become your most productive financial asset. One that left alone compounds faster than you could ever add to it manually. I want to tell you what that threshold is, how to calculate yours, and why the single most common way people think about retirement readiness is measuring the wrong thing entirely. Before I get into the math, I need you to sit with an image for a few minutes, because the image is going to do more work than any spreadsheet could. Picture a wheat field in the weeks before harvest. The farmer planted in spring. All summer he watered, he watched, he worried. The growth was invisible for a long time. Underground, the root system was developing. The stalks were building structure. Nothing about the field looked impressive to anyone driving past on a rural highway. Then at some point, not a specific day you can circle on a calendar, but a real threshold, the heads of grain became heavy enough that wind moved through the field in visible waves. A biologist watching it would tell you, the plant has stored enough energy that it no longer depends on what comes in from the outside. The rain still helps. But the harvest is now inevitable. The root system will finish the job. Your retirement portfolio does this. There is a point where it crosses from a thing that needs you to a thing that could survive without you. A portfolio that has crossed that threshold keeps growing even through bad years. Even through a year where you can't contribute. Even through a recession that would have flattened you at a lower balance, the roots are deep enough. The harvest is no longer in question. The farmers who lose sleep are the ones who haven't reached that point yet, and know it. The ones who planted late, or watered inconsistently, or just don't know where in the season they are. That's not a character flaw. It's an information problem. They don't know if the roots are deep enough. Neither do most investors, because nobody has ever walked them through how to check. What I'm going to show you is how to check. The concept is called the Runway ratio. It's not something you'll find in a mutual fund prospectus or a retirement calculator that asks your age and spits out a recommended allocation. It's a ratio between two numbers, what your portfolio is already generating annually on its own, and what you actually need per year in retirement. When that ratio crosses one, when the portfolio's annual output matches your annual spending needs, the harvest is no longer in question. You could stop contributing today, stop working tomorrow, and the math would still get you there, assuming a historical return rate and a reasonable withdrawal structure. Most people spend their entire working lives focused on one side of that ratio. They build the portfolio, but they never define the denominator. They never nail down what they actually need per year in retirement. Not what the generic calculator suggests, not a ballpark round number, but the specific figure that accounts for their actual cost of living, their realistic healthcare estimate, and a conservative adjustment for what Social Security will actually pay. Without that denominator, you can never know if you've crossed the threshold. You're a farmer with no idea what a harvest looks like. You're worried about the field, but you haven't decided what you're growing it for. If you're getting real value from this, subscribe now. I put out this kind of specific numbers-first analysis every week, and the algorithm genuinely does not surface it to you unless you're subscribed. That's not a gimmick. It's just how the recommendation engine works. One click. Now let me give you the actual math that makes this concrete, because the ratio is only useful when it has real numbers in it. The S&P 500 has returned an average of roughly 10% annually in nominal terms going back a century. That's Shiller's data, publicly available through Yale. After inflation, the real return is closer to 7%. Every calculation in this video uses 7%, because 7% is what your purchasing power actually does over time, and I'd rather show you something that holds up in a bad decade than something that flatters you in a good one. At 7%, a portfolio of $200,000 generates $14,000 per year in returns. That sounds significant until you measure it against what most American households actually spend. The Bureau of Labor Statistics puts average annual household expenditures just over $77,000 as of their most recent consumer expenditure survey. $14,000 covers 18% of that. You still need everything else to come from somewhere. The harvest isn't close. At $500,000, the same 7% generates $35,000 per year. Better. But if your spending needs in retirement are $60,000 a year, a reasonable number for someone maintaining a modest lifestyle outside a major metro area, you're still covering just over half. The field is getting there. The grain heads are forming, but you're not across the threshold yet. At $800,000, 7% generates $56,000 per year. Now we're close. If your actual annual spending need in retirement is $55,000, you have crossed the runway ratio. The portfolio's output now matches or exceeds your need. The root system is deep enough. The harvest is no longer contingent on what you add. That's the number that matters. Not 1 million, not 1.46 million. The number where your portfolio's annual return, at a conservative real rate, covers your actual annual spending need. That number is personal. For some people, it's 400,000. For others, it's 1.2 million. The average retirement calculator will never tell you which one is yours because it doesn't ask the right question. The right question is not, how much should I have saved by 65? The right question is, what does my lifestyle cost per year realistically in retirement? Once you have that number, you divide it by 0.07. That's your threshold. That's the portfolio size at which the anxiety stops making rational sense. I want to introduce someone here because the math lands differently when it has a name attached to it. Lorraine is 47 years old. She's a registered nurse in a trauma ICU in Spokane, Washington. She's been in this work for 19 years. Her base salary runs around $88,000, with overtime that sometimes pushes her closer to $95,000. She has $134,000 saved across a hospital system 403B, and a Roth IRA she opened in 2016 after a coworker mentioned it at lunch. She contributes 8% of her gross to the 403B, plus the employer match of 3%. The Roth gets whatever's left of her budget at the end of most months, which is sometimes $300 and sometimes nothing. Lorraine checks her balances the way most of us check a car's low fuel indicator. Not often, not happily, and mostly hoping the gauge isn't as bad as she suspects. She has never made a reckless financial move. She didn't pull money from the market during the volatility in 2022. She's not carrying credit card balances. She didn't upgrade her car when her lease ended last year. She bought the car outright, used, at a price she was comfortable with. By any reasonable behavioral measure, Lorraine is doing the right things. And she still lies awake sometimes, doing math she doesn't have the right variables for, stacking her balance against an imaginary number she absorbed from somewhere. 1 million, 1.5 million, whatever the last headline said, and concluding that she is behind in a race she doesn't fully understand. The anxiety Lorraine feels is not irrational. It's what happens when you're measuring your progress toward a target you've never precisely defined, using a ruler the financial media helpfully keeps blurring for you. Lorraine's actual annual spending, tracked honestly across her last 3 years of bank statements, runs about $54,000. She doesn't include the discretionary stuff she's already planning to cut in retirement, the work lunches, the commuting costs, the professional dues. Her realistic retirement spend is somewhere between $48,000 and $52,000 per year. She's also assuming Social Security at a conservative level because she's read enough to know the trust fund projections and doesn't want to plan around the full benefit. She expects something closer to $16,000 per year from Social Security using the SSA's own reduced scenario estimates. That means her retirement portfolio needs to cover roughly $35,000 per year on its own, maybe $36,000. Divide 35,000 by 0.07. Lorraine's threshold, the portfolio size where the runway ratio crosses 1, where the field's harvest becomes inevitable, is $500,000, not $1 million, not $1.46 million, 500,000. She's at 134,000 today, at 47, with 18 years until 65. The number that has been keeping her awake at night is a number that applies to someone else's life. That's the first thing the runway ratio does for you. It replaces the industry's generic anxiety-inducing benchmark with your actual number, derived from your actual cost of living. And in Lorraine's case, the actual number changes the entire picture. Now here's where it gets interesting, because knowing your threshold is only half the problem. The second half is understanding why most people either miscalculate it, or, once they know it, accidentally move the target in the wrong direction without realizing it. Let me be precise about the two most common ways the denominator gets inflated into a number that causes unnecessary anxiety. The first is the replacement rate assumption. You've probably seen it somewhere. The idea that you'll need 80% of your pre-retirement income to maintain your lifestyle in retirement. That figure traces back to research from the Employee Benefit Research Institute and became a default in virtually every online retirement calculator built in the past 30 years. The problem is that it was a median estimate across a wide population, and it was calculated before the modern landscape of healthcare costs, before the structural shift in how Americans actually spend in retirement, and before the significant variation between a person who retires with a paid-off house in a mid-sized city and one who retires with a mortgage still running in coastal California. The J.P. Morgan Guide to the Markets, which tracks actual spending patterns across retirees at different income levels, consistently shows that retirement spending for middle-income households lands somewhere between 60 and 70% of pre-retirement income, not 80. And that number drops further in the early 70s as mobility slows and some discretionary spending naturally contracts. If you've been building your anxiety around an 80% target on your current income, you may be solving for a number that's 15 to 20% larger than you actually need. The field is probably closer to ready than the newspaper told you. The second miscalculation is what I'd call the Social Security ghost. Most retirement projections, including the ones your HR software runs during open enrollment and the ones embedded in bank websites, use the full projected Social Security benefit. The SSA's own actuaries have been clear in their annual trustees' reports. The Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund is projected to face depletion in the early 2030s. When that happens, without legislative action, scheduled benefits get cut automatically to match incoming payroll tax revenue, somewhere between 17 and 23% below current projections. You are not being paranoid if you plan around a reduced benefit. You are being honest about the actuary's own math. And yet the default calculator does not do this. It hands you an inflated benefit figure, you build your target around it, and you end up solving for a portfolio size you don't actually need, while simultaneously feeling behind on reaching it. Here's what I find genuinely frustrating about this. Both of these miscalculations run in the same direction. They both inflate the denominator. They both make your threshold look farther away than it is. They're not random errors. They're systematic errors, and they land in a way that keeps you uncertain, keeps you engaged with financial products promising better returns, keeps you susceptible to the pitch that you need an actively managed fund, or an advisor charging 1% of your assets to navigate the complexity. The complexity is not real. The target is not as large as they're telling you, and the industry profits from the gap between those two facts. I want to stay with Lorraine for a minute because her situation illustrates this clearly. The number she had absorbed from the financial media, the vague 1 million to 1.5 million that hovered in her head, was built on exactly these two inflated assumptions. It assumed 80% income replacement on her highest earning years, and it assumed the full Social Security projection. When you strip both of those out and replace them with the actual numbers from her actual bank statements and a conservatively adjusted SSA estimate, her threshold drops from somewhere north of 1 million to 500,000. The anxiety was not a signal that she was failing. It was a signal that she was solving for the wrong equation. The thing about knowing your real number, and I've seen this change how people behave, not just how they feel, is that it shifts your focus from the size of the pile to the rate at which you're closing the gap. Those are different problems with different levers. Lorraine has 134,000 today. She needs 500,000. The gap is 366,000. At her current contribution rate, 8% employee plus 3% employer match on 88,000, which works out to about 9,640 per year going in, plus 7% annual returns on the existing balance. The math on her trajectory looks like this. Her existing 134,000, compounding at 7% for 18 years without a single new dollar added, grows to approximately 452,000. That alone almost closes the entire gap. Her contributions over the same 18 years, and this assumes no raises, no overtime redirected, no catch-up contribution when she crosses 50, add approximately another 320,000. That puts her well past 500,000 by 65. Closer to 770,000. Lorraine does not have a retirement problem. She has a retirement anxiety problem. And the two are not the same thing. But here's the part that I don't want to gloss over, because this is where most videos about "you're actually doing fine" become dangerously incomplete. Knowing the right threshold doesn't protect you from the 3 behavioral mistakes that can erase the math anyway. And all 3 of them are invisible until it's too late to reverse them. The first is the allocation drift nobody checks. Vanguard's How America Saves report from 2024 found that a meaningful share of plan participants in their 40s are still holding age-inappropriate allocations, either too conservative, which leaves return on the table for decades, or too concentrated in their employer's stock, which loads up idiosyncratic risk the Runway ratio calculation never accounts for. The ratio assumes a diversified portfolio earning a market rate. If you're in a money market fund because you haven't looked at your allocation since your enrollment paperwork, or if 30% of your 403b is in hospital system stock, your real rate of return is almost certainly below 7%, and the harvest timeline you're imagining is quietly longer than the one you calculated. This matters for Lorraine specifically because her 403b enrollment defaulted her into a target date fund, which is appropriate. But her Roth IRA, the one she opened in 2016 after that lunch conversation, has been sitting in the brokerage's default money market position ever since. She contributed to it. She just never allocated it. The money sitting in that account over the past 9 years has earned something in the low single digits while the market compounded at roughly 9% nominal over that same window. That's not a catastrophic error, but it is a silent one. And it's one that shrank her existing balance compared to what it should be if the allocation had been set correctly from the start. The second is fee drag, and I want to be specific about it rather than just waving at it the way most content does. Morningstar's 2024 fund fee study found that the average expense ratio for an actively managed U.S. equity mutual fund runs around 1% annually. Some hospital system retirement plans are better than others. Some have genuinely low-cost index options. Some are still running menus that include funds charging over 1% in annual fees. The difference between a fund at 1% and a comparable index fund at 0.05% sounds trivial on a small balance. On $134,000 over 18 years, it is not trivial. The compounding drag from a 1% annual fee over 18 years at 7% gross return reduces your ending balance by roughly 19% compared to a near-zero fee index fund. On Lorraine's projected balance, that's the difference between arriving at $770,000 and arriving at $620,000, $150,000. Lost not to a market crash, not to a bad decision, but to a line item on a fund document she has probably never read. The third is what I think of as the anchor problem, and this is the most psychologically interesting one. Once you know your threshold, once the Runway ratio gives you a real target, there's a tendency to treat crossing it as the finish line. To throttle back contributions, to mentally declare victory, to let the lifestyle absorb the cash flow that was previously going to investments. That's not irrational. The brain treats a goal that's been reached as a completed task. But the Runway ratio is not a finish line. It's the point where the field becomes self-sustaining. The harvest is still 18 years away for Lorraine, and a lot can happen to the cost of that harvest between now and then. Healthcare inflation, a change in living situation, an unexpected dependent. The threshold you calculate today is the floor. Treating it like the ceiling is how people who did the math correctly still end up working longer than they planned. I want to name the systemic piece here because I think it matters. The financial media's incentive is to keep retirement planning complicated anxiety-inducing, and dependent on expert guidance. The products that benefit from that dynamic, actively managed funds, advisory relationships structured as a percentage of assets, insurance products sold as retirement vehicles, all generate revenue proportional to how uncertain you feel and how long you stay engaged. A person who has calculated their runway ratio, confirmed they're on track, and set up low-cost automatic contributions inside an appropriately allocated account is a bad customer. They don't need anything. They don't click on articles about the best funds for 2026. They don't respond to ads about building a customized retirement income plan. The simplicity that actually works is the thing the industry can't package and sell. That's not a conspiracy. It's just an incentive structure. And once you see it, you stop mistaking complexity for expertise. The EBRI Retirement Confidence Survey from 2025 found that 68% of workers reported feeling somewhat or very confident about having enough money to live comfortably through retirement. But among those same workers, fewer than half had done any calculation to determine what that number actually was. They were confident or unconfident based on feelings, not numbers. And feelings without numbers are almost always calibrated to whatever the last headline said, which is almost always calibrated to generate engagement, which means it is almost always calibrated to induce mild fear. You don't have to live there. The calculation takes about 20 minutes. The variables are your actual annual spending, your realistic Social Security estimate, and a conservative return rate. The result is a number that belongs to you, not to a generational average, not to a media benchmark. And once you have that number, the question changes from am I behind to how fast am I closing the gap? Those are different questions. The second one has a concrete, actionable answer. For Lorraine, the gap is closing faster than her anxiety suggested. But there are two things she doesn't know yet. Both of them fixable, both of them urgent in a specific way. And one of them has been quietly working against her for 9 years. The Roth IRA sitting in the default money market position is the first thing. Lorraine has been contributing to it intermittently since 2016. 9 years of deposits that have been earning somewhere between 3 and 4% in a vehicle designed to hold cash temporarily, not build wealth over decades. The account currently holds roughly $14,000. If that same $14,000 had been allocated to a total market index fund from day one and earned 7% real, it would be worth approximately $26,000 today. The gap between $26,000 and $14,000 is not a dramatic number on its own. But the compounding on that $12,000 difference, running forward another 18 years at 7%, adds roughly $40,000 to her final balance. $40,000 from one allocation decision she never got around to making. Not from a bad move. From no move at all. The fix takes about 15 minutes inside the Roth IRA dashboard. You find the current holdings, see the money market position, move it into a total market index fund, Vanguard's VTSX, Fidelity's FZROX, Schwab's SWTSX, all of them under 0.1% in annual fees, and set any future contributions to go there automatically. That's the entire action. No ongoing monitoring required, no quarterly rebalancing until she's within 5 years of retirement. The field just needed to be planted properly. It's been sitting in a pot on the windowsill. The second thing Lorraine doesn't know is her blended expense ratio across both accounts. She knows what she pays for groceries. She has no idea what she pays annually for the funds she's been holding for years. This is normal. Most plan participants don't know this number. Vanguard's How America Saves 2024 found that cost awareness among retirement savers remains low across income levels. It's not a knowledge class issue, it's a visibility issue. The number is buried in a fund prospectus or a plan document most people have never opened. Here's why it matters in Lorraine's specific case. If her 403B, which holds the bulk of her balance, roughly $120,000, is in funds averaging 0.7% in annual fees, rather than the near-zero options that almost certainly exist somewhere in her hospital system's plan menu, the drag over 18 years on that balance is approximately $31,000 in lost compounding. Combined with the Roth correction, she's looking at over $70,000 in recoverable value from 2 administrative tasks. Not from finding a better investment strategy, not from taking on more risk, from fixing things that are already broken in a plan that is otherwise working correctly. And yes, I know how that sounds. $70,000 from logging into 2 accounts. But that's exactly what makes this so frustrating. Not for you personally, but about the system that designed it this way. The fees are invisible by design. The default allocation stays wherever enrollment set it because changing it requires initiative the plan administrator never encourages. The complexity is not accidental. It is profitable. A fee-only financial planner, someone who charges by the hour for their time, not a percentage of your assets, can audit both accounts in a single meeting and tell you exactly what you're paying and what the cheaper equivalent inside your existing plan is. The National Association of Personal Financial Advisors keeps a searchable directory. An hourly planner charges somewhere between $250 and $400 per hour. A 2-hour audit that saves $70,000 in compounding is not an expense. It's the highest return appointment on your calendar this year. That said, for Lorraine's situation, she doesn't actually need to pay anyone. The information is available inside her own account. She needs to open the fund detail for each position in her 403B, find the expense ratio column, and compare those numbers to whatever index fund alternatives the plan offers. If any fund is above 0.5%, she finds the cheapest available index equivalent and switches. If her plan doesn't offer anything below 0.5%, that's worth raising with her HR department. Plans with poor fund menus can be formally challenged by participants, and enough requests sometimes move administrators to expand their options. Now, the part of this conversation I want to close on is not a list of tasks. It's a reframe, because the tasks only matter if you understand what you're actually solving for. Most of the retirement content that reaches you is calibrated around a fear. The fear that you haven't saved enough, that you're behind, that the number you need is impossibly large, and you're running out of time. That fear is a product. It is manufactured and distributed by an industry that profits when you stay anxious and engaged with financial products promising relief. And it is kept alive by the fact that most people never do the 20-minute calculation that would either confirm the fear or dissolve it. The Runway ratio doesn't promise you that everything is fine. Some people who run the calculation will find a genuine gap, a real shortfall between their trajectory and their actual spending needs. That's important information. Better to find it at 47 than at 62, when the levers available are fewer and the cost of each year of delay is higher. The calculation is not optimistic. It's accurate. And accurate is more useful than anything else. But the other thing it does, and I think this is underappreciated, is it gives you the right variable to manage. Not the return rate, not the market's behavior this year, not whether your fund beat its benchmark. Those are variables you don't control. The things you do control are your spending denominator, your contribution rate, your allocation, and your fee structure. The Runway ratio puts all 4 of those in front of you at once. It makes the problem solvable instead of ambient. Lorraine's situation fully resolved. She fixes the Roth allocation this week. She spends 45 minutes inside her 403B, identifies 2 funds above 0.6% in annual fees, and switches to the plan's total stock market index fund at 0.04%. She calls her HR benefits line and asks for the full plan fee disclosure document. Plans are legally required to provide it, and confirms her new allocation. She does not touch any of this again until she turns 50, at which point she becomes eligible for catch-up contributions that allow her to add an extra $7,500 annually to her 403B on top of the standard limit. She sets a calendar reminder for that birthday. Not a vague intention, a specific date, a specific action. At 65, if the market delivers 7% real, which is the conservative number, the one that held across multiple recessions, 2 market crashes, and a global pandemic, Lorraine's portfolio lands somewhere between $750,000 and $820,000. Her Runway ratio crossed 1 at around year 12 when she's 59. From that point forward, the field was self-sustaining. The harvest was no longer in question. She kept contributing anyway because the math rewarded it. But the anxiety, the specific, particular kind of retirement anxiety that comes from not knowing whether you're going to be okay, that left sometime in her mid-50s, when the numbers became undeniable. That's what I mean when I say the people who sleep well at night are not the ones with the most money. They're the ones who crossed a specific number and knew when they crossed it. Your number is calculable. Pull up 3 years of bank statements. Average your annual spending. Subtract your conservative Social Security estimate. Divide what's left by 0.07. Write that number down somewhere, you'll see it. Then open your retirement accounts, both of them, all of them, and find out what you're paying in annual fees and whether your allocation is actually invested. Not eventually. This week. The cost of one more month of a misallocated Roth IRA is small. The cost of 9 more years of it was $40,000. The field is already growing. Some of you are closer to the threshold than you think. The only thing standing between where you are and the kind of sleep that comes from knowing you've done the math is about an hour of your time and a willingness to look at the actual numbers instead of the ones the headlines keep handing you. If this was useful, subscribe. I cover this kind of specific, system-level analysis every week, the kind that gives you a real number at the end instead of a vague reassurance. The algorithm won't find you again unless you tell it to. The wheat doesn't need you to watch it every day. It needs the roots to be deep enough. Go check on the roots.